Happy Monday morning, everybody. It's the waitingfornextyear.com podcast. I'm your host, Craig Lindell, and today we're going to talk about some sports and some movies and plenty of other things. But before we get there, patreon.com. This is where you go to support Waiting for Next Year, and you support the podcast and everything that we're doing, and we try and give stuff back to you. The people of Patreon have gotten t-shirts in some cases. There's stickers that are still waiting to be shipped out, and there is a coupon code for GV Art, a good friend of Waiting for Next Year, for 15% off that you cannot have unless you are a Patreon supporter. So those are the kinds of things we're looking to do. All that we need from you is a little bit of financial support, and you can have it too. Patreon.com/WFNY, Patreon.com/WFNY. Now let's talk about sports. The Cleveland Indians are officially in spring training, and everything is fun and exciting right now. The injuries are starting to scare people a little bit. You've got Michael Brantley, of course, and that was a known quantity coming in, but now a shoulder, kind of a rest period for Jason Kipnis. There are a lot of different things going on, and those give you pause. You know, when you're on the cusp of entering a 162 game marathon, the idea that some guys might not be healthy is a little bit scary. It's something that you gotta think about, especially knowing just how hard and long the slog is from the regular season all the way to the postseason. But at the same time, it's hard to not get excited about this Cleveland Indians team and everything that they've done last year. They were injured last year when they made it to the World Series. You know, between Yan Gomes and Michael Brantley and all these different pieces in the starting rotation, Carlos Carrasco and Danny Salazar, who were injured and unavailable for the most part. The fact that Ryan Merritt pitched in the playoffs and all these different things, it feels like bonus. The Indians are going to have an entire season with Andrew Miller. They signed Encarnacion, which is still just hard to believe at this point. The amount of excitement that I have for this Indian season is probably not since 2008, when the Indians were coming back off that one postseason where they lost in the ALCS to Boston. This is probably the closest I've been to being excited for an Indian season since then. So it's incredible. And at the same time, though, I haven't even watched a minute of baseball yet, other than a couple GIFs on Twitter, a couple highlight videos. It's weird. It's a hard time to wrap your head around baseball with all that's going on, but it's exciting. I'm trying to figure out if any is this the most excited you've been about an Indians team coming into spring training? Does this rival the excitement we had in the 90s? Is the Encarnacion signing somehow better? I think it might be. I think if we're truly being honest, we truly sit down and look at every single Indians team that was entering spring training, even back to the Manny Ramirez, Albert Bell, Jim Thome days, I think this has got to be on par. Those teams didn't have this level of pitching. They didn't have Corey Kluber. They certainly didn't have... You know, it feels like the Indians have three legitimate options for 4 and 5 starter each. Like, not all of them are ideal, of course, but the Indians have choices and options all the way down to 4th and 5th starter. So often through the 90s, we were struggling to find number ones and number twos, and even the number ones wouldn't have necessarily been number ones in the entire American League. So it felt speculative. It felt like a bet. But now, this Indians team, they should be favored in the AL. They did nothing but get better this offseason. And with that level of expectation, knowing that they made as much or more improvement than anybody else. I mean, Andrew Miller alone, we got to see him in the playoffs. But to have him for an entire season, how many wins does that contribute to? How many extra wins do he and Encarnacion give us in the regular season as fans that we weren't privy to last year? It's just, I'm not going to say it's going to be easy to get back to the playoffs, and certainly it's never easy to make the playoffs and then get to the World Series, but this should be one of the best regular seasons we've seen since the 90s, since they started rattling things off. And that's what I've always said about the Indians, is that, I didn't want to fall into the trap of just saying the Dolans are cheap or being unfair to Mark Shapiro, but I thought it was reasonable to set the standard that not only do the Indians need to occasionally make the playoffs, they need to occasionally make the playoffs 2 years in a row. They occasionally need to put 2, 3, 4 years together over a 20-year span. And I don't think that's asking too much. I know the Indians are going to have to retool from time to time, and they're not going to be signing the most expensive free agents in free agency every single year. But this idea that you shouldn't be able to hold the team to the standard of making it to the playoffs 2, 3, 4 years in a row, that doesn't seem unreasonable to me. And whether or not the Indians do this year, I think you'd be hard-pressed to blame the front office if somehow the Indians miss the playoffs this year. All you can guarantee is your process. The results have to come over time, but you can't guarantee results. All you can do is guarantee your effort and your process. And I think the Indians have done a good job this offseason. And I think in previous years when I might have said that, I was being a bit of an apologist or a little bit hopeful as a fan. But legitimately, across the league, across all the most objective scribes, I think you have to look at what the Indians did this year and say that they objectively got better. They objectively got better. All right, moving along to the Oscars. There was a lot of buzz this morning when I woke up to the Oscar news that this movie didn't win and was accidentally announced as the winner, and this movie actually won. And I'm usually somebody who's seen all these Oscar movies, and I've only seen a couple of them this year. I think I saw Arrival and maybe one or two others. But, The Fences one about NASA. Hidden Figures. See, I did it too. People got in trouble for mixing those two movies up. But then once somebody got in trouble for it, that caused me even more confusion because I was trying to think about what that story meant. But no, I saw the one about the NASA, the women of NASA, the African American women of NASA who were kind of the first computers before there were computers. And that, these movies were all kind of good, but I wouldn't say it was like an exceptional Oscar year. I haven't seen La La Land yet, but mostly because that's not really my type of movie anyway. I don't generally like anything. I love music. I love movies. I don't necessarily love the combination of the two. I put up with it at times in the kids' movies, and Moana this year was certainly more musical than it was cartoon, and before that, Frozen was a musical success, kind of a blockbuster type deal. So sometimes you have to put up with it in kids' movies, specifically Disney kids' movies, where they're almost musicals at a certain point. But the Baz Luhrmann movies, I've never really wanted to watch those. Moulin Rouge, I turned off. I actually convinced my entire family to turn that movie off back in the day because they started doing some Broadwayified version of Smells Like Teen Spirit, and I was like, nope, not going to finish this one. And I understand that, maybe there was a good movie in there, but not for me. Not for me. I was quick to judge that one and just turn it off. So, maybe at some point I will see La La Land. I also don't like the name. The name, I feel like an infant, like a toddler being forced to say La La Land. Nobody wants to say that. If you title your movie that, it might be cute, it might be funny, it might be interesting by the time somebody actually sees the movie. But recognize there's a whole segment of the population, not that I'm too cool for it, but I just don't want to be turned into a toddler with the name of your movie, any more than, I don't want to go to a restaurant and order a bacon cheeseburger and have it called the cutesy burger. I don't want to order a cutesy burger. Well done, Don't give it some silly name. Give it a name that I don't mind saying to my friends, like I don't want to sit there and tell people, hey, I went to see La La Land. I feel like a little baby, you know? Don't do that to me. And keep that in mind when you're naming your things, you know? Your hamburgers on restaurant menus, your movies. So I haven't seen that one yet, but and of course that movie ends up losing. And it just feels like we keep having movies that win Best Picture over and over and over again that nobody ever really wants to see ever again. Like, when was the last time you said, you know what, let's load up Slumdog Millionaire. Let's load that movie up and see it again. And maybe that's not important. Maybe Best Picture isn't about having a movie that will stand the test of time and be rewatchable. But it seems very strange and conceited to award a bunch of movies that people don't really want to see. And I guess you'll always have that in any kind of awards ceremony, where the best albums aren't necessarily the ones that sell the most, so that Britney Spears sells more records, so she's not going to win the award. But you do seem to have that a lot too, where Beyonce might win a Grammy and she also might have sold the most. Katy Perry will not only sell the most singles, but she could get Song of the Year or Record of the Year, which is kind of like Song of the Year. But the movies, they're never going to... Every now and again, you'll get a Return of the King, the third Lord of the Rings movie, that will not only be a blockbuster in terms of box office, but will also get an award as to critical acclaim. But more often than not, it feels like we have these years, and of course Braveheart's another example of that, but more often than not, it feels like we have these years where these movies are almost have to apologize for the lack of business they do while they're accepting their critically acclaimed award, you know, during the award season. And it just seems like a weird dichotomy that Hollywood has this business, but they're almost embarrassed by the business that they have. They're too embarrassed by the product they put out that makes money, that they have this entire award ceremony based around giving themselves awards that kind of deify the stuff that they can't get anybody to pay money for. And it ends up being kind of a pretentious exercise. And I don't know, I guess I'll check the ratings on the Oscars and we'll see if people are tuning them out as a result. But I don't know. Maybe that's where the MTV Movie Awards used to pick up the slack. They weren't too pretentious to honor the movies, the best of the popcorn movies, the best of the movies that made the most money. It seems like at a certain point, some of these movies get entered into theaters, and just enough theaters, just enough screens to qualify for Oscars. But isn't there a screen requirement in the Oscars so that you can't just enter any kind of movie? And the documentary this year was the OJ ESPN documentary, which was like basically a 7 or an 8 part miniseries on television. And they showed it in a couple of theaters just enough times to qualify for an Oscar. But that wasn't a movie. That wasn't a film. It was a miniseries, a TV show, a serial, you know, a short form serial, I guess. I don't know. It just seems like, you know, we're going out of our way to rig this thing and do different things than what they were designed to be. And I guess it doesn't matter. You know, as long as people are enjoying the Oscars, that's all that really matters. But I don't see the point. I don't understand the point. So I haven't seen all the movies. I'll probably see a bunch of them at some point. But I used to watch all of them like it was a requirement or you know, you really should see them. And so I would go out of my way and I would see them all and I would rank them and try and figure out whether I agreed with the best picture or not. And anymore, there's so many good TV shows and there's so much good content out there that they've been marginalized. And maybe the award shows and the Oscars themselves are worth taking in as their own separate thing. But I don't think they do what they used to do in terms of honoring the best films or or recognizing the best performances and talent. You know, for every film that gets recognized after the fact for being great that nobody saw, you know, the ones that nobody saw, like nobody saw Whiplash, and then it won a bunch of awards, and then a bunch of people watched it, and it really was kind of good. It was like Rocky except music, you know, or I don't know. But it was a great movie. It really was, and I could see people watching that movie again at some point. It had rewatchability and that level of entertainment value. But for every one of those, it feels like there are 10 that just aren't all that universally interesting, even as they're critically acclaimed. So I don't know. Which, last but not least, that's the movie stuff. Last but not least, we're getting closer and closer to the NFL draft, and I don't know how many of you guys know that this happens, but during the NFL draft, every couple of weeks or whatever, I don't know if it's weekly or every couple of weeks, ESPN and some of these publications trot out their draft experts like Mike Mayock, some people that I really do respect, and they get on conference calls with other media, and they talk about draft picks and how they feel about guys. And, well, I like Carson Wentz. I think he could eventually project to be blah, 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 but I don't think he's a day one guy. And they give their opinions, and they basically hold press conferences with media outlets. And I think they do it by division. So, like, all the AFC North people, all the AFC North media will get together, and Mike Mayock will jump on the line, and they'll talk about the different teams and their different potential draft picks and how he feels about certain prospects. And it's like, this might, far be it for me to tell you that it's uninteresting or not worth doing. I think it is worth doing, but I think it's a very weird thing. It's media creating media. It's media creating stories. It's very much kind of the self-fulfilling thing. And every year we read about prospects flying up the draft boards. And meanwhile, do you really think that the Cleveland Browns draft board is like the stock market and it's moving every day from now until draft day? I think the Browns have pretty much established where most of their draft roster is, at least down to the round. There might be, all right, well, we had this guy at 37 in the second round, and we went to the combine and we interviewed him, and he interviewed even better. So we pushed him up 2 slots above this guy, and this guy dropped off the board completely because he had a bad interview, but under no circumstance will we draft this guy. Oh, that guy got arrested, so he's off the board. Those kinds of things happen. But this idea that the Cleveland Browns would have an opinion of Mitch Trubisky, that he's the 20th most valuable draft prospect in 2017, but he's moving. He's on the move, that there's no new information, but we feel like now, 2 weeks later, he's number 12, with a bullet, like it's Casey Kasem's top 40, and songs are gaining in popularity as time moves along. That's not happening. And so when these guys come on, maybe Mike Mayock learned something about the Cleveland Browns draft board, and so he describes it as a guy flying up the charts, but that's not how these things work. And I think there's a separation between the reality of the situation and how teams organize their draft prospects on their draft board and the way we talk about them in the media. And when the media, even really plugged in experts like Mike Mayock or Chris Mortensen or any of these guys, when they hold press conferences so that ESPN gets to have their name attached to news items, it's basically like a big news media circle jerk. And that, again, I do find it kind of interesting because I like to talk about the draft, but we need to recognize it for what it is. The media talking about media, creating stories. So all of a sudden, I mean, and that's the mock draft thing too. And we post a lot of mock draft content on Waiting for Next Year because it's fun and interesting. But I hope we're putting perspective out there that exactly what these things are and not anything that they're not. Because I hope that people take these for the entertainment value and discussion point that they're supposed to be. But there's this idea that NFL draft boards work in a certain way based on the way that the media talks about them and the way the media creates these storylines around the draft process. And I hope that people aren't confused as to how it goes. I see guys like Elaine Adkins and Daryl Ryder talking about it on Twitter, and so I know these guys understand it. I just hope that comes across to the fans. I hope that gets relayed to the fans that Mitch Trubisky is... Different teams will have different evaluations on him and Deshaun Kaiser and Deshaun Watson, but this idea that they're flying up and down the charts, not the case. Not the case. Maybe Mike Mayock finds out that one team has Kaiser above Watson and another team has Watson above Kaiser, but they're both static. You know, the Tampa Bay draft board is mostly static, as is the Falcons draft board, as is the Bills and the Browns. Like, these things aren't changing wildly at this point unless a guy is falling off the board completely because he got hurt or arrested or whatever. You know, there are news stories that cause these guys to be changed and have the draft boards changed drastically, but it's usually somebody falling off. Last but not least, it occurs to me, and maybe I've talked about this because, you know, everybody knows I've kind of beaten the Jimmy Garoppolo thing to death. Much like I think the Browns draft board is set at this point, I don't know that the Browns have 100% decided whether they're interested in Jimmy Garoppolo or not, regardless of value. There's a process in place, or a process that they're going to go through in terms of evaluating their desire to have him. And maybe at the late stages, obviously they have to decide whether they want him or not first. And then at the late stages of that, they might start getting into value propositions to figure out what it's worth. But if the Browns decide he's that starter, he's going to be worth almost any amount of compensation. You know, obviously there is something that would make them say no, but do we know that the Browns even know whether they want him or not? Do we know that the Browns have finished that proposition? Have they had all their meetings? Have they looked at all the tape? Has everybody not only looked at the tape, but put their heads together? Has Hugh Jackson talked to the scouts and Sashi Brown and everybody? Has everybody talked about it? Like, I think there's this concept when we talk about this, well, he's worth this, and no, he's not worth that. The Browns might not even know if they want him at all. He might be a no-go. They might have decided that they're better off to keep kicking that can down the road and looking elsewhere. I haven't seen a whole lot of reporting on that to know whether the Browns are even decided at all yet, whether they want him. So these are the kinds of things I find it interesting. And we talk about all the news, quote-unquote news, whether it's draft picks flying up the board or guys being worth this, that, or the other thing. And then we find out later on that that's not really how the process works. And so if there's one thing that I want to do, and I think that we should do at Waiting for Next Year, it's to continue to report on this stuff for the entertainment value, but also keep in perspective exactly what these things are in reality from a pragmatic standpoint and what they're not from a pragmatic standpoint. Because I think we sometimes get caught up in the conversation and the fun fan debate that we might lose track of how these things actually work. And there's enough evidence out there for us to know with at least some level of certainty that there are certain ways that these things do work and certain ways that these things don't work. Last but not least, Andrew Hawkins. The Browns cut loose Andrew Hawkins, and it was a really nice joint press release. Again, it's a scenario where it looks like the Browns handled their business the right way. That was my initial take, because they let go of a guy when he still has a chance to go find his next contract. And then I watched Andrew Hawkins uninterrupted, and it seems like maybe Andrew Hawkins kind of asked the Browns to cut him loose anyway. Maybe he had a hand in saying, I would like to go elsewhere. Will you please grant me my release? And the Browns obliged, and on the conditions of everybody complimenting each other and having a rosy, fun press release, the Browns did that. I don't really blame Andrew Hawkins, and I don't really blame the Browns for granting his request, because Andrew Hawkins was due $1.8 million in 2017, and there's a good chance, or a chance, I don't know how good the chance is, that Andrew Hawkins would be able to find himself a 2, maybe 3-year deal that guarantees any amount of money more than $1.8 million, in which case it's in his best interest to go find that deal, even if it's $1.9 million. If he can get more guaranteed money than what he was guaranteed in 1 year, it's better for him as an athlete, better for him certainly as an athlete who plays a dangerous game where he's actually had concussions before. So it could be a kind of a win-win. The Browns remove $1.8 million from their cap, and by the time the Browns are good, 30-year-old Andrew Hawkins isn't going to be part of the equation. And maybe, a 5'8" Andrew Hawkins, no matter how fast his feet are, maybe he was never going to be part of the equation anyway. So it's probably a win-win, but I think my initial reaction was that the Browns cut him, and then on second thought, after looking at the tape on the uninterrupted, I think Andrew Hawkins asked for his release, and everybody handled it with maturity, and I think it turned out to be a win-win. But how many times have we seen the Browns turn a win-win into a win-lose where they look dumb? Not necessarily in the Sashi Brown regime, but just in the history. And I know they don't have to own up for that, but they wear the brown and orange. They got that logo, that lack of a logo, so they got to own it. So anyway, it's fine. Everything's fine. The Browns haven't won anything. There's no reason to congratulate them just yet, but they haven't not won anything. You kind of congratulating the Browns for their lack of negatives. It's a very interesting proposition, but one that we're forced to do with the Cleveland Browns as they are and as they have been. So that's all I got for right now. It's a busy Monday, and I will have more later in the week. I'm talking to Sports Yelling this week. It's been a long time since she has graced us with her presence on the podcast, mostly because I'm a bad producer and I haven't asked recently. I'm a jerk, but I've always told you I'm a bad producer. So we will have Sports Yelling to talk much, much, much more about Cleveland Indians baseball. So thanks so much for listening. We'll talk to you next time. It's been the waitingfornextyear.com podcast.